Hi, myself. I'm Nihal Moidin from Department of Zoology. Today we have a conference keynote by Professor Dhruv Raina, who is the professor in History of Science and Education at Zakir Hussain Center for Education Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is a philosopher and historian of science. It's a pride to be with him in the special occasion of MESMAC International Conference 2020. Thank you. So myself, I'm Nihal, postgrad student in zoology.
Zoology?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my question is, while looking at your profile, I found that you've done your PhD, MSc in IIT Bombay. Then you shifted into something like history of science. What is the reason for that?
Okay. No, I think that while I was I was always interested in history and the philosophy of science. That was my interest. And while I was a student at IIT Bombay had a very good library which had a collection of most of the important works in the philosophy of science. So I began reading those works, and then when I began reading those works, my interest in the history and philosophy of science deepened. These were also years where there was, at a much wider level, there was a great deal of reflection among scientists as to why has not science delivered in this country. And there were equally trenchant critics of science who were criticizing science for not having delivered and for having created a way of life that was not in consonance with what they thought were the needs of the Indian nation. So there was a criticism of science, at the same time there was a reflection of science. So for example, in Kerala, you know that the Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad was a very important movement headed by MP Parmeshwaran and the rest. So in like manner, in different parts of India, there was the Hoshangabad experiment going on in Madhya Pradesh. So there were in different parts of the country, there was a great deal of reflection on the nature of science. And for me, I said that maybe here's an opportunity for me to undertake my own research on the nature of science, the historical context of science and its evolution. So it was a nice transition point for me. Yeah.
I'm a science student, so it is my postgraduates. I have a doubt that whether I haven't studied anything about the science of biology, my previous books or any classes.
Yeah.
What is the reason that our education system is not promoting the things?
That was in fact one of the point I was trying to make today. That somehow within the largely English-speaking world, and I'm not saying this is true all over the world, within the largely English-speaking world, there is a certain imaginary of science that behind you have a graveyard of theories which have been proven wrong. That every theory is a successful theory, and we need not bother about the past. But actually that view of science is very wrong, and this is something that historians and philosophers of science over the past 50 to 60 years have shown us where this view was wrong. All right? But even before that, there were very important scientists. People like the physicist, mathematician R.E. Poincaré, or even people like Einstein, who were deeply, deeply, deeply aware of the sciences that went before them. They were aware of the history of evolution and so I think that, it's been a big failing in India that somehow we haven't instructed our children. It's not part of our curriculum to do so. But now, in the new ISERs, the Indian Institutes of Science Education and Research, they are trying to incorporate that into their teaching. Yeah.
Okay, so in the previous Science Congress, we found that mainly the talks were about mythology, proving myths by using science. What do you feel the authenticity between the mythology of science and the real science?
No, I think there's a double question here. One is the mythology of science and real science. I think there are myths, which is a separate issue, and there are scientific claims made about myths. Right? And I think those scientific claims made about myths must be debunked. But myths must themselves be studied by those who study mythology, those who study anthropology. They have to be studied and understood. So it's not that the past was a blank slate with respect to ideas we might consider scientific or not. But those ideas were situated in their time and were limited by their time. So to give you an example, if I look at, say, Aryabhata's predictions, in his time they were very, very good. But given the standards of accuracy we have today, Aryabhata's predictions are not of that order. So we have to see the evolution of science in its historical context and situate it. We can't make claims of that order. So I think that there are two issues there. One is that, yeah, making scientific claims about myths and stories within epics, you take away the literary value of that. All right. So by making false scientific claims. But on the other hand, I mean, science too has its own mythology. All right. So, I mean, all scientists believe that, well, science is about truth, about goodness, about beauty, and over there also we know, no, we say no, there are claims. We do know, for example, that Robert Oppenheimer, after they did the Los Alamos experiment, said, all right, we have done the devil's work, now we must go back to science. So, the point I was trying to make is, like there's a context to myth, there's also a context to science. All right? And we do know, for example, that there were scientists who did weird experiments on unaware Jewish prisoners in concentration camps who did medical research on Jewish prisoners. All right? So we do know this is also the context within which science is done. People who did research on eugenics, I mean, carried out experiments on people of other races without their knowing that they were being experimented on. So we should be careful in making, not drawing into the mythology of science either.
Like recently there was a discussion about the presence of oxygen in cow dung and so, and scientists are explaining a lot. What's your opinion about such things?
Yeah, no. I think that it's a basically effort by Hindu nationalists to recuperate some lost glory of within quotes Hindu science. And I don't think we can have a Hindu science or we can have a Christian science. We can have a science because different traditions of science are in communication with each other. That is the nature of scientific knowledge. All right, that is one. The other thing is, which is also what I said in my talk today, that if I do scientific experiments on any of those claims will get debunked independently. Take a sample of cow urine and I can defy you to find gold in it, right? So, I mean, go ahead and do the experiment. Which is why then some of them say, no, you cannot validate the claims of traditional medicine or traditional knowledge using the methods of modern science. Why can't you do that? Why can't you do that?
So we relate the history of civilization and history of science as close relation. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, there was, the history of civilizations provided a broader rubric for the discussion of history of science. So if you picked up a book on the history of mathematics, the chapters were framed in civilizational terms. Today, historians have begun to understand that actually the boundary between civilizations is very porous. That the boundaries between civilizations are not easily defined. All right. So, for example, the Brahma Sfuta Siddhanta travels into the Arab world in the 7th century, 8th century. And Al-Khwarizmi reads it. It influences Al-Khwarizmi's mathematics. And Al-Khwarizmi's mathematics then influences the mathematics of other people. So I think that, the idea of civilization is based on the notion of territoriality, of, a particular kind of identity. And today people think that civilization is too broad a category to capture so much diversity. The amount of diversity you see within a civilization, you say, what is civilization then?
There's a time also end of civilization and emergence of modern period. So what if the existence of science in that case?
No, I don't know whether I would put the story. See, one is that the category civilization as a concept used in historical discourse is an invention of the 18th century. Now, all concepts and categories are historical inventions. And sometimes you begin to see that no concept or category has an eternal half-life. No. All right? So I think civilization helped historians in the 18th century, but as their knowledge began to grow about the world, now they begin to find that civilization is too broad a concept and category, and that historical investigation itself has prompted a revision of that category.
So in Indian perspective, recently the government has approved many funds and all. What is your opinion about the research programs that is ongoing in scientific world currently?
Yeah, I mean that is what. Yeah, that is also something I raised about today. That I think that mm, I think that there have been setbacks for certain kinds of research, and that is part of that must be seen not as something which this government has undertaken on its own, but part of a certain larger global phenomena. All over the world, there are certain cutbacks for a certain kind of research. Now, what do I mean by certain kind of research? Um, this is a point beautifully raised by Einstein in one of his early writings. That why do I do research? And I think I do research for two reasons. One is what you might call the cognitive goal of science. I am curious about the world. And I do research in order to satisfy my curiosity and understand the workings of the world. And there's another kind of research which you might call meets the extrinsic goals of science or the utilitarian goals of science. It is I do research in order to find a cure for tuberculosis, HIV, or Ebola virus, or those kinds of things. All right? Now, these two kinds of research cannot be put into separate departments. All right? And I think this is the idiocy of present regimes, that they think that you should support only this research and not that research. That you should support the research which meets the utilitarian goals of science but not the cognitive goals of science. But the research system is an ecosystem in which there is a mutual interdependence between both of these. All right? But globally, somehow, the fixation is on that, and that will prove very harmful for science.
So do you think that most of the prominent scientists are stepping back due to some reasons in current? If some prominent scientists are stepping back due to some particular reasons currently?
I think, no, I mean, there are as many people who are speaking up for science today. I mean, this is what we have seen. There are as many people who are speaking up for science today as those who, for whatever reasons, are also compromising for science. But I think that globally, the movement of the march for science, globally, which started off in the United States, in Europe, has picked up in India also. The march for science, scientists are beginning to speak up. And I think after a long time in India, scientists who took science for granted are now beginning to speak. So there are people who are on the other side, but there are as many people who are speaking up for science. If they don't speak, you're finished. I mean, right? You have to speak for science. But we have to speak for a science which embraces complexity. We have to speak for a science which embraces humility. All right? Not arrogance. All right?
Yes, sir.
Science must make you humble, not arrogant.
So from being from JNU, sir, what's your opinion about the students of JNU, about their social commitment and all?
You know what, I'm not going to run down my students. My students are being run down by the media, all right? But I think that what started off in JNU as a struggle about fees has now become a national issue about the future of public education. That's what is at stake today. What is the future of public education? And it acquires a particular kind of salience in JNU because a large number of our students come from really, really poor backgrounds. Really poor backgrounds. A large number of students come from there, and they are fighting for their futures. It's an ideological battle, but must not be seen as an ideological battle of left and right. It's is the state responsible to the education, responsible for the education of its citizens? That's what the battle should be seen, not about left and right. But what I must say about JNU is that we get very good students in the social sciences, and they come from all over India. And yeah, I am very grateful for that. Yeah.
So what's your opinion about MESMAC in MES, our conference here?
Okay. No, actually I was supposed to have come last year, but I had to I was already committed to a lecture here. But I think there's something I'm beginning to realize now. I mean, I've been told over here in conversations that somehow the framework of disciplinarity is very, very strong in Kerala's higher education teaching. And if this kind of conference every year is going to bring people from different disciplinary and interdisciplinary backgrounds to come and talk to students, to raise the question of interdisciplinarity, I think it's a very, very good thing. It also brings people to Kerala who may not normally have come to Kerala for a variety of reasons. To come to Kerala and for people to come to Kerala and talk to students and talk about different ideas. And I mean, Kerala was always open to the world, but open to the world in a different way.
Okay, thank you, sir.